What's up, guys, and welcome to another Hungover podcast, the topical podcast where we talk about everything that you need to know about. Today's topic is global warming, a very controversial topic in America, but it seems like it's not that controversial in the rest of the world. I'm one of your hosts, Julien, of course, alongside
Ivan, the other host, who nailed it this time.
We nailed it. We didn't try this twice. Of course, you can find this podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, and of course in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to Hungover Gaming YouTube channel. And we would also like it very much if you left us an iTunes review, perhaps even a 5-star review, maybe. And we will definitely read all the reviews that we ever get, whether they be good or bad, on the podcast for you guys. Of course, Ivan, we start every podcast out by asking each other, what sort of media have you been consuming, whether it be movies, music, books, TV shows, video games, etc. And what did you drink last night?
So I have enjoyed the flash sale, and there was a stealth action game which I picked up called Shadwin.
The flash sale on PSN, PlayStation Network. Awesome.
Shadwin is it's interesting so far. I've basically gone through some of the tutorial stages. It's got an interesting time mechanic where if you move, time moves, but if you stand in one spot, time doesn't move unless you make it move.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
actually.
So they're messing with the time mechanics, and then it's got that whole Prince of Persia Sands of Time thing where if you mess up, you can just rewind the time.
Awesome.
So it's actually really fast to restart when you've made a mistake, which is good because it's basically stealth action puzzles.
Very cool. Very cool.
Not a lot of combat so far, but maybe because I was using a child character, now I've switched to the adult character, so maybe there's more combat. Who knows? It's pretty lackadaisical when it comes to the atmosphere and the graphics. It's pretty standard 3D stuff, but kind of on the lower end. But I think it's a more indie game, so that's pretty impressive. And I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, especially ones based around Game of Thrones.
Oh, okay.
So it's I know that you don't watch Game of Thrones, right?
I do not, but I'm waiting for the end of the show so I can just watch it all at once.
So the new season is coming out quite soon, and as a primer, rather than watching all of the episodes again, I'm listening to a deep dive on all of the episodes that have happened so far, it's a podcast called Binge Mode, which is hosted by The Ringer, which is this big conglomerate of podcasts. It's pretty good, pretty interesting, and the thing that I really like about it is that, well, it's kind of they've got some personality and comedic elements to it, so it's not just dry, flat recap of the episode, but it also incorporates a lot of things from the books, which I haven't read, into it. And so they deep dive on aspects of the world building that I don't really know all that much about or can't remember that much about. So it's pretty interesting to rethink the world of Game of Thrones with a little bit deeper knowledge about person A or organization B or world building tool C. So it's pretty fun.
Awesome, man.
And then, last but not least, I watched Big Little Lies on HBO. It is a really fantastic series.
I think I see a poster for that every morning on the D train in New York City. But yeah, that's awesome.
D train.
What is that about?
It's a pretty interesting series that follows 4 female protagonists, basically. And the story focuses on the 4 women and kind of their lives in this Monterey, California city, which surrounding how they balance out being women, being moms, having roles and responsibilities like jobs or other things, how relationships work, and it's a really intense amount of study on relationships and feminism and being a woman in the modern world, and it's really well acted, really exceptionally well written, and it has the best Reese Witherspoon performance I've ever seen.
Whoa, really?
Yeah.
Better than Clueless?
She wasn't in Clueless. She was Legally Blonde. Alicia Silverstone was in Clueless.
Oh shit! Really?
Yeah.
I'm just mixing up blonde white women now. That's bad.
Nicole Kidman's in it. She's.
I could also mix her up with that person. But no, I actually really like Reese Witherspoon. If I remember correctly, maybe I'm remembering.
Maybe
another
not.
Blonde white woman. No, I think I do. What movie did I really like with her in?
Walk the Line, Legally Blonde.
I did like Legally Blonde for sure. That was a great movie.
What's that one with Ryan Gosling and Sarah Michelle Gellar?
Just on the tip of the tongue.
That's a really sexy movie.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, we'll look that up. You can look that up while I guess go. Unless you have anything that you've drank.
No,
that was really interesting.
That's pretty much it. I've also consumed a grapefruit IPA, which sucked. Thank you, Sam Adams.
God, well, you
Cruel
know what?
Intentions was that movie.
Okay, that I haven't seen, but I need to see that now. Wait, what? The other movie with Ryan Gosling that I really like was it Crazy Stupid Love or?
Yeah, he was in that.
That where he does the Dirty Dancing move.
Yeah.
And that was actually a really amazing movie. With is Steve Carell in that as well?
He is. He's the main. Yeah. He's the main older dude.
That movie was actually like you think it would be just a stupid rom-com. I actually really like rom-coms because I'm that guy. But this one actually had some fucking substance, and it was a really great movie. You should go check it out. Came out, I think, when we were in college, like 5 years ago. So
yeah.
But yeah. So what I've been doing, I've been playing a lot of Overwatch. I've been playing now I think I've been playing Dark Souls because I've been editing a video about Dark Souls. And then we also played Dive Kick-a-thon. So be on the lookout for a Let's Play on our YouTube channel, Hungover Gaming, where we will play the game Dive Kick and get really angry at each other. All the mind games will happen. That game's actually really cool. So it's a 2-button fighting game where if you basically can jump and kick, and you can dash backwards, basically. And also you have supers, which is pretty cool. But if you get hit by any attack, which is just a kick, which is why it's called Dive Kick, then you lose the round. So it's a 2-button fighting game that is one hit. All your health is gone in one hit. So it's really a super mind game heavy game. So you need to have a huge read on your opponent, and you need to know your moves and the matchups. So it's really cool. I suggest you check it out. If you missed the flash sale, it is currently $5. But if you saw it on the flash sale, it was $1 on PlayStation Network. I'm sure you can get it on Steam and Xbox One as well. But Yvonne, aside from those games, I've been playing more Zelda. I've located all of the shrines. So now on my trip to China, I'm going to Hong Kong on the 3rd of July, and I'll be there for a while. And I have found all the shrines, so now all I have to do is complete them. So I'm very excited for this. It's going to be a great plane ride. 16 hours. Such a long plane ride. Did you know that? 16 hours to get to Hong Kong?
That's too much time.
That's as long as it takes to get to South Africa.
Wow.
Which is at the fucking end of the world. But yeah, so I've been doing that in terms of video gaming. I watched a couple more episodes of House of Cards. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't watched it yet, but usually people who watch House of Cards binge watch it, if I'm not mistaken, because it is such a gripping show. But Frank Underwood just announced a very plot twist heavy announcement to the Congress. So I was really not expecting it. But yeah, so that's what's been going on in that show, and that's really all I've done. I haven't really drank anything. Well, this weekend I saw my good buddy. He's leaving the city for a while, so I had this weird mango beer from Harpoon Brewery.
Mango beer.
Yeah, mango beer. So it basically tastes like a mango first, and then it tastes like beer after. So these fruity beers, you get the first initial taste, and then it just tastes like wheat beer because it's usually a wheat beer, because those are less hoppy, so they don't get so overpowering. This is exactly what it tastes like. It tastes like fake-ish mango and then wheat beer. And it's supposed to be their summer beer for, I guess, this season. And it's pretty interesting. I like it, but I can't say I would finish more than a 6-pack of it. It's nice to have one. It's refreshing, but not that refreshing. So, Ivan,
yo,
you know what's not refreshing is breathing in a lot of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and greenhouse gases. Maybe some methane. I wouldn't want to breathe that in. And I don't think our planet enjoys it very much, particularly all the life on the planet, the glaciers, the ecosystem, all the jet streams.
That's not necessarily true.
Some
There
you're
are
right,
some
a
things
lot of bacteria
that enjoy
like,
it. There's that algae which is growing and coating the ocean because
And-
it's gobbling it all up.
Yeah, and trees actually consume a lot of carbon dioxide, if not as much as they can before they're chopped down, of course.
But
Now,
the
Ivan,
methane.
this leads us into the topic of the show, a very serious topic that will affect probably our lives and, of course, our children's lives if we ever have them. Although I don't know if it would make very much sense considering the inclement changes to our climate. So, Ivan, where do you want to begin with global warming as a topic?
Let's let you, as the resident climate scientist, let's let you kick it off.
All right, well, let's begin. We've been scientists have been aware of global warming, which is, of course, the warming of the climate. So our climate has been steadily increasing in temperature since we've been recording the average, which is important to know. This is the average. Whenever a scientist or anyone, a climate change activist, talks about the warming of our climate, they're talking about the average temperature of the entire Earth is warming. So we've been measuring this since since like the mid 1900s, so around 1950. You can see there are plenty of charts. I'm sure Al Gore will tell you.
Well, the global one has been for sure monitored for that long, but there have been temperatures that have been taken in regions, like the European scientists monitored the European climate closely for a long time and have recorded evidence of it. And I think sporadically we have those recordings from around the world. So this is why we can have some level of measurement from very ancient times until now. Now it's centralized in certain areas, so it might look like a little bit of dips or rises based on that, but we have at least some data from way back when. But what you're bringing up is absolutely correct in terms of the level of supremely accurate data from the 1950s onward.
Right. So basically, the average climate temperature of the entire Earth is increasing indefinitely, and we've come to the point where if it increases 2 more degrees Celsius, that is, we're going to be seeing some very drastic changes in our weather that we see on average, and of course our sea levels will also rise very, very high, to the point where certain places like maybe Florida, for instance, won't really be on land anymore. They will be under submerged. Oh, at least a little bit of Florida will be submerged. Of course, Miami for sure will be submerged under the sea. So unless they build dikes, which I think they're currently doing. But
so can you
yeah.
tell us why 2 degrees makes such a drastic difference?
Well, okay, so 2 degrees will end up melting a lot of the glacial systems that we have in the North Pole and the Antarctic regions, and that amount. I mean, you have to think about how large glaciers are. They're very large, and so that amount of water being added to the ocean in total you might not think that's that much, but you also have to factor in that things expand when they are warmed. So and you know this, but if you heat anything up, you will see it actually expand. This is also true with water. So water will expand if it's heated up. You'll have a higher volume of water if it's warmer. So if our oceans are warmed by even 2 degrees, they're going to rise because they're going to expand. So we're going to see a lot more higher water levels in our ocean, which is very bad for where people live on the coastal regions. Even me, I live in New York City, so this is kind of scary for me in maybe 50 years.
But Al Gore said most of Manhattan could be flooded.
Right. Well, this is where the controversy comes up, Ivan. I guess we can just dive into it. So okay. Well, let's first define what a greenhouse gas is. So a greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide, methane, carbon monoxide, things like this that you can't you and I can't breathe it in. Not only is it toxic to humans, but it is what ends up happening is it gets trapped in our ozone layer. So we're producing a lot of carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels, from burning coal to produce our electricity, things like this. And
but
methane
humans
actually
create 2 pounds of CO2 a day just by breathing. Are we polluters?
Yeah, technically, anything that produces CO2 from burning anything is contributing to the CO2 levels that humans are producing. So that gets trapped in the ozone layer, and what happens is the light from the sun ends up going through to warm our lives and sometimes produce energy in solar cells. But then it rises back up and gets trapped in the CO2 layer that is now currently under our ozone layer, and that ends up warming the entire Earth even more because the heat is then trapped by the CO2. So that's why you hear the greenhouse gas effect. Usually if you have ever been in a greenhouse, it is a lot warmer because they trap the humidity in, and that helps heat things up.
So, isn't it true that those CO2 molecules would form clouds more often and also help prevent sunlight from getting through?
Maybe.
Did I catch you in
yes?
In,
I don't know that much about
in a conundrum?
I'm not a global warming scientist. Yeah,
look at
sure.
Venus. It's covered in clouds, and it's never been cooler.
Well, it hasn't exactly. Venus is fucked. Yeah. So basically, we are steadily heading towards the climate of Venus, if you think about it. So Venus has a lot of carbon dioxide in its atmosphere, but also it produces sulfuric acid in its atmosphere. So and that sort of gas buildup actually increases the pressure in the Venus atmosphere. So we would actually end up being crushed by all the pressure in the atmosphere if we ever tried to land there, which I think the Russians landed a probe there and it lasted maybe like a month or something.
Minutes. I think it lasted a few hours on the planet's surface.
Right. So metal couldn't even hold its structure at that point. But that's what's in our future technically, for our planet. But I think this is
that's
where
the most worst case scenario.
Right. So this is where I think a lot of people get hung up. So a lot of climate change deniers get hung up. So I think, and this is where the messaging needs to be more clear from scientists and experts in global warming. So let's take Al Gore, for example. So he said by this year, a lot of horrible things would happen in terms of climate, right? He said a lot of things will be underwater. He said a lot of these things would happen. I'm not sure exactly what he said, but he said within 20 years of when he made An Inconvenient Truth that things would, a lot of countries would be submerged underwater. And is that true at all right now? No, it's not really that true. So this is where the controversy, I think, arises and why people don't believe it. So believe that global warming is indeed a fact. We're basically being told by these scientists, these climate experts, that things will happen at a certain point, but I'm not entirely sure that that's even true. So you really have to take it with a grain of salt what they're saying. So we have basically the why it's happening, the how it's happening, but we don't have the when is it going to happen. So global warming is happening right now, but we don't have a when, right? So
and
that's
the difficulty with that is
saying.
because the mathematical models which are used to demonstrate global warming are notoriously difficult to control. I mean, thinking about chaos theory, right? Mm-hmm. So the more factors you input into a system, the less likely you are to accurately predict the result of said system, right? Jurassic Park notated this with their use of chaos theory, right? The more things that you put into the park, and you don't know how it's going to end up, but we knew that it was going to be a disaster. In the same way that you have mathematical models for climate and weather patterns, etc., and you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of different results, and then you have to group them to say which is most likely, least likely, etc. But it is within those degrees of percentages that you have the mobility of climate change deniers in which they operate, right? So we're talking about degrees of percent of when the ocean will become untenably hot, right? Degrees of percent of when the effects of human induced climate change will corrupt the earth to the point where humans can survive. The earth will survive, and plants, vegetation, etc. There will be ways that the earth will continue to live post humanity,
probably through bacteria,
right?
Or mostly cockroaches, actually.
but it's the idea is when it will live, when it will die, when the earth will become untenable for humans, rather.
Right.
And I think that the skepticism lives within the periods of uncertainty which occur within these mathematical models, which, as you're pointing out, are increasingly difficult, or not increasingly, but are actually increasingly more easy to solve because the technology is getting better, but it's still leagues of percentages away from being completely accurate. And the climate change deniers can just say, look, this hasn't happened the way that you have said it should, so therefore it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And that is the living in that percentage of deniability is where these climate change people can survive, also that they can earn another buck. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, of course. It is. I mean, I don't want to see the planet go to shit, but and it, because there's no immediate threat from global warming, as I'm using a lot of electricity right now, nothing's going wrong. I don't drive a car or anything, but when you drive a car, you're doing fine. You use gas every day, maybe to cook something, no problems, right? So it comes and you flip the switch on and off, etc., the light switch. So it really comes down to, my life is run by things that produce a lot of greenhouse gases, and I'm not seeing any change, and it would really suck and inconvenience me to change over to renewable energy. That would cost a lot of money initially. Of course, installing solar panels on your house is very expensive, but of course you have to look at the long term. Usually it looks like, at least if you live in California, I guess, it ends up being cheaper to have solar panels installed if you just pay that down payment initially.
But it's still cost prohibitive for vast amounts of the population.
Of course, right. So it's not. Of course, a lot of people cannot afford that initial down payment to install solar panels. So the thing is, right. This is where the solution. A lot of climate change activists really have to get their message straight. So you can't just say, it's not just as easy, let's just switch our entire system over to solar panels, wind energy, hydrodynamic. What is water?
Hydroelectric power.
Hydroelectric power.
It just seems
energy.
oxymoronic because water and electricity.
Yeah. Right. So, let's just completely switch over. Yeah, please tell me, how are you going to do that? Right? So that's where the problem arises. It's very difficult to change these systems that we've been using for the past, since the Industrial Revolution, really. Basically cars, right? How do you even change that? Also, I heard an interesting statistic about cars. So you have to really factor in the amount of energy used to make a car. So right. Apparently cars, the amount of pollution that a car will make in its lifetime, half of it is produced during the production of the car. So it doesn't make sense to just scrap all of our cars that we have right now and just make all ones that run on electricity, make Tesla cars or something, or because then we're producing that much more CO2 and greenhouse gases. So you have to. It's not as simple as just changing over, just like that. That's where I think a lot of the global warming activists sort of have a problem in their argument, right? It's not as easy as just flipping a switch, and it's going to take a long time to completely switch over to renewable energy. Even though I know there are some very small countries, especially in a large country like America, I'm saying, but there are some very small countries that are actually apparently completely renewable energy. I believe Sweden or Switzerland, I can't remember, one of the S countries. Apparently or maybe it was Denmark, they just announced that they're completely renewable in energy, they're making like no greenhouse gas emissions.
That's incredible. But I mean, there's also a level, like you're saying, there's a level of complexity with dealing with a place the size of the United States and a place with interests in as large as U.S. corporations are.
Yes.
So there's just a tremendous amount of lobbying which takes place, and the majority of the money can be put in from very large oil gas companies into Congress to pay for their elections, and so we have growing election funding. So thank you, Citizens United. So unlimited donations. Corporations are people too, which has always been a thing, but now corporations can voice the real thing about Citizens United was that money equals speech. It's just a ridiculous amount of money being put into these elections, and a lot of it coming from these lobbying groups that are supportive of oil and gas. And it's exactly like what was happening with the tobacco companies, where they could recruit 2 or 3 scientists in a pack of 1,000 scientists to say, "Oh, tobacco doesn't harm your lungs," etc. Whereas we know exactly that tobacco causes cancer, is incredibly dangerous to use, the amount of other chemicals and different things that were included in cigarettes also cause disease and problems and health problems. And it's just that they can hand pick these 2 or 3 scientists that they do all of the studying for, and these scientists can magic up this idea of not being able to find, a light in a candle factory. It's
These
an amount.
guys are ruining our reputation, man.
Yeah,
Fucking
and it's
assholes.
an amount.
Jesus Christ! Sorry about the dog outside. Fuck you. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Sorry.
It's an incredible amount of deniability, but at the same time, we now have a renewable energy sector which is growing at an incredibly fast rate. In last year they grew 12 times faster than other sections of the economy. So it's not to say that renewable energy has no future, because it's clearly gaining steam. Excuse the maybe pun.
I'm excited too. I love renewable energy.
So renewable energy has a lot of growth and possibility in the future, and really we need to balance out and phase out as much as we can oil and gas, and move towards these renewable energies that are much less intensive on the world's resources.
Right. Yeah. Actually, Bill Nye just officially endorsed this company called Rayton Solar. They're currently, I think, just starting up their company. They've announced that they have a way to make solar cells that are from the same amount of silicon, right? So, okay, currently our solar cells are made from silicon, and which is a semiconductor. So they basically actually, the way they're manufactured currently, I think they actually use a saw to cut off from a silicon single crystal your solar cell, and it has a certain thickness, which is actually very thick. And you end up losing a lot of the silicon to silicon dust because of it, from the manufacturing process. So Rayton Solar has developed a method using, I believe, either like a proton beam or an electron beam to cleave off a very thin portion of the silicon with very little wastage of the silicon, due to there's no dust in this process. So they can cleave off a very thin portion of it. They can make more solar cells that are the same efficiency or slightly better efficiency than current solar cells because of how thin they are. And they can make more from the same amount of silicon, thus reducing the price about 30%. So they're making strides towards making solar energy a lot cheaper. And I think you can invest in them now, although the minimum investment is $500, so it's a doozy. But I think it's worth, if more companies like this get investors in the early stages, they're going to be very rich, I think, if you can afford to invest in them now.
So doesn't this show just how the market is correcting itself? Just the same way
Absolutely.
that oil and going from animal fats to electricity and natural gas going from whale blubber for lighting to other methods of lighting, won't that self-correct? Why do we need to care as consumers if the market will correct itself and we'll just find different ways of spending our money on energy?
Well, I mean, you need to care as consumers because we need to expedite this process as quickly as possible, I think. But you're right. You should do what's financially sound for you. And I think what's really the way to go about this is sort of the way we went about learning how to recycle. So we don't even second guess now as a society in America recycling at all, right? I mean, I always recycle everything I can because it's actually very easy to do now. There's always a recycle bin for my trash. There's recycle bins on many corners in New York City, although not everyone lives in New York City, I'm aware. But there are options for recycling. People are given this option, and it's very easy to do, and it was sort of phased in very slowly over time. I mean, if you think about in the 70s, I don't believe anyone recycled, but now everyone recycles throughout the world, pretty much. It's a very common practice. So I think if we actually phase in things like this slowly into our society, we'll see a huge change in the next 20 years towards using renewable energy. Like if we reduce the cost of solar cells and we make them easily accessible to us, then we're going to switch over much quicker than if we just say, oh, you can't use electricity generated by coal anymore, or what I think we use gas to generate our electricity in America. We definitely don't. There isn't much coal burning, I think. I might be wrong about that. But if we just make things accessible and easy to use, then that is the best way to switch over to renewable energy, I think. But that's just me, Ivan.
But do we need to go to renewable energy?
Is
How
what
do
you're
we
saying.
know that this isn't just a blip on the scale?
Because of the data, man. It's
But Europe was this hot at different points in the world.
yes, but okay, so the difference is in between climate and weather. So you have to separate those two. Whenever people think of the word climate, they're usually thinking of the weather. So the weather is your day-to-day weather, right? It actually fluctuates quite a lot. You'll see one day it's hot, one day it's cold, although that's happening a lot more recently, but especially in the northeast of America, I think. But if you look at the climate of the world, it is steadily increasing at a rate that actually is it hasn't increased this quickly ever before in the history of human recordings of the world temperature. So I think that is enough evidence in my mind. And you have to separate the two. So climate is governed by certain laws. Weather can fluctuate a lot, but the climate does not fluctuate that much.
But there have been occasional periods like mini ice ages and mini hot flashes throughout the entirety of the Earth. So why is this different than that standard cycle?
Well,
because the climate did change, even if it did fluctuate, even these percentages of degrees.
Okay, well, the difference is we're correlating this with the increase in CO2 production by humans, which I guess you could say correlation or causation does not necessarily mean correlation at that point. But at no point during those ice ages or those heat flashes in Europe that you're speaking of was there also an increase in CO2 production, I believe.
So,
if I'm not mistaken.
So how can you be sure that the extra CO2 that's being produced is being produced by humans and not being released by, say, permafrost heating up and different things? It's part of the natural cycle of things. The permafrost heats up. Underneath there are CO2 bubbles, they're rising, and this is a natural process of unlocking the levels of gas that are located under the earth. Or different other processes in which CO2 is a very natural occurring thing, like I said earlier today, right? So 2 pounds of CO2 is produced by humans just by breathing a day. Now more by me because I blow a lot of hot air, but still.
Well, we know we can measure the amount of CO2 a car will produce, and we know how much coal is being burned every day in order to produce electrical energy. So I believe that is where those are the largest producers of CO2, and we can measure how much on average each country produces in terms of CO2. So I think those are the primary CO2 producers. Of course, there's also the greenhouse gas methane, which is actually a funny way to get global warming, greenhouse gas. A lot of cow production in America is actually very high. We eat a lot of beef, and the cow industry produces a lot of farts, actually, and this is where methane is primarily coming from. So it's just very funny to think about, but of course, very detrimental to our society, to our environment, that is.
So as much as we've stated here that those are leading causes of production of CO2, we haven't necessarily...
Maybe I haven't answered your question.
We haven't differentiated it. And I think that one of the things that we can do is, aren't there markers of how the CO2 is produced? Can't we measure human-produced CO2 versus naturally occurring CO2?
Right.
Are there different levels of isotopes?
I'm not sure. I think it's... I mean, we can measure where the CO2 is coming from. That just based on calculations of how usage of cars, usage of electricity, usage of the things that we do, that's generally where a lot of climate scientists are gathering their data from. So, and they can measure... of course, I'm not a climate scientist, so I don't know the exact processes that they go through. But they can measure natural production of CO2, so the CO2 you're talking about that comes out from the ground or any other natural processes. And they can measure those, and they can add them together, and they can see which one's producing more, right? So that's... I'm not entirely sure it's a different isotope. The only isotope... The difference in isotopes would be in the carbon. So there's carbon-12, which makes up the majority of the carbon in the universe, and then there's carbon-13, which is the most common isotope other than carbon-12 of carbon. So I guess that would be one way of doing it, but I think it's mostly carbon-12. I have to guess, but
so the only definitive way to prove it is by measuring the emissions.
Is average calculations, yes, emissions. So, okay. I mean, obviously there's no sensor on each and every car that's being beamed to Neil deGrasse Tyson's computer or something, right? There's no sensor on your car that tells him how much your car is producing. So they have to obviously take a general average of how many cars there are in America, or which is quite a lot. There's got to be at least 5 to 1 in terms of population, I'd say. A lot of people have a lot of cars in this country. And that's not even counting car enthusiasts, right? But obviously they're not driving all their cars all the time. That would be impossible. But yeah, so, I mean, you have to take an average, right? So on average, there are this many cars. On average, cars produce this much CO2 production and carbon monoxide as well. And then you add all that up and you get an average. Of course, that's not necessarily that accurate, but it's accurate enough to correlate the amount of CO2. And of course, they can... Again, I'm not a climate scientist. This is if I were to do this is how I would do it. They obviously have much more accurate measurements of CO2 production. But this is a crude way of doing it. You could calculate it that way, and I think you would get a pretty good estimate of how much CO2 is being produced per country, per capita.
So, I mean, if we look at it in the general sense of things, the United States isn't even that high on the list of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas producers. I mean, we're not we're high up, but we're not the top.
I thought we were top 5.
What about China and India?
I know China and India.
If we're producing a lot of also renewable and other energies, so we're leaders in nuclear production. We're leading the way in terms of technological advancement. Look at Elon Musk's Tesla. I know he's South African, but where is Tesla based? And so, why should Americans be so concerned if the American market is attempting to solve this problem, and we have leaders of greenhouse production such as China and India that are just leaving this and letting this be and helping that
It's a good
clean
question.
clean coal. Well, that's their lead production.
Well, this again, another controversial topic, which is why a lot of people don't. I don't know. A lot of people again say what you're asking, right? So America just pulled out due to current leadership, just pulled out of the Paris climate change agreement, right? Which was basically a loose agreement to make these goals and to reduce CO2 production over a certain amount of years. That literally every country except for Syria and I believe Nicaragua are not agreed to as well. Of course, America just joined that group of countries. Syria couldn't agree to it because they have they have a lot of problems going on, which we actually talked about in a past podcast, civil war going on, etc. And then Nicaragua, I think, is the other country. I might be wrong. They actually didn't agree to it because they didn't think the agreement went far enough. So they're doing their own thing. America just pulled out of it because Donald Trump, our current president, thinks that it's only to benefit other countries, and we're doing. I don't even know exactly what he said. We're basically, it's a bad agreement for America because we would lose money. I think that's the gist of what he said.
Well, China in 2014, China produced double the amount of CO2 emissions from fossil fuel and other industrial processes than the U.S. did.
I can't speak towards China, although I do know a lot of, they're investing currently a lot of money into solar and renewable energy research. I know China is actually going to be leading the way towards cheap and affordable solar panels. I believe that 100%. I read a lot of scientific articles because I'm getting my PhD in chemistry, and solar energy is a really there's a really big movement called, I guess they're if you want to look this up, they're let's see, let me think of it. They're organic perovskite not oxides. So they're organic perovskite solar crystals. So they let me look up the exact.
Oh, they're the ones that you can put on any surface.
Not really. So let me find them. Sorry. Let me find out the exact perovskite organic solar cell. What is the exact? So usually, I guess I'll go into a little science for you guys. Sorry. Usually a perovskite crystal structure has the crystal structure AbO3. So A and B can be any transition metal. So a transition metal are the elements in the middle of the periodic table, things like iron, nickel, cobalt, elements like that. Then you have oxygen, which is the O3. So you have 3 oxygens per every other one, every of the A and B. So you end up getting a perovskite crystal structure. So it's a repeating unit, which has the AbO3 formula throughout the whole structure. So the organic the organic perovskites have an AbX3, where X can be a halogen. So halogens are chlorine, fluorine, iodine, bromine, those elements. So usually the most commonly made one is actually, A and B differ this time. So A is an ammonia structure, so it's CH3, NH3, and then B is lead usually in these crystals. So it has to be a large 2+. I don't necessarily need to go into this. We can turn this into a science podcast if we want. But yeah, so that structure is actually very, I think, unstable. They sort of get messed up if they're put in any water. But the really interesting thing is it has a band gap of 1.5 to 2.2 electron volts, which is in the solar region of the visible spectrum. So you can end up producing electricity with them if you put them in a solar cell. It's the general gist. You guys should go look them up. I don't want to go into too much depth. If you're interested, go look them up. They're basically, you can look up perovskite solar cell. They're interesting now. The interesting thing is that people have only been recently researching them for the past 10 or so years, actually more like 20 years now, and they've increased the solar cell efficiency by like 20%. So they've gone from 0% to 20% in 20 years, and that's more, it shows promising growth is essentially it. So Chinese are investing a lot of money in the research of these perovskites.
But aren't they able to do that on the back of their industry? So you can,
yes, of course,
hyper leap forward in your research if you're doing it on the back of coal production, right?
No,
so
of
on
course.
the one hand, they're saying, "Oh, the U.S. should be as mindful and pay it forward in terms of this Paris Climate Agreement." On the other hand, they're pushing forward and advancing in technology on the back of coal production, oil and gas, just the same way that everybody else is. So they're using their advantage in their industry to push forward. And so why is the U.S. going to be held to such high standards and be forced to pay for it with high technology, etc., high prices for U.S. citizens, if China is doing the same thing and doing it in a way that, because they have certain characteristics of a nation, that they aren't fully accepted within the premiership of the world, that they won't have the high restrictions that places like the U.S. will have, and they'll be able to leap forward in technology on the backs of the ability to pollute, etc.
Right. So I think I watched this documentary with Leonardo DiCaprio. It was a very interesting documentary about global warming. I forgot the name of it, but Leonardo DiCaprio, I think he was an ambassador to the UN about global science change and global warming and things like that. He gave a speech there for some reason. I think it was actually when we agreed to the Paris climate change agreement with Obama. So I believe what he said was, or he interviewed either a politician in India or someone higher up in India. I can't remember. It was a woman. And what she was arguing was you can't say, and this is, of course, specific to India. I'm not talking about China right now. You can't blame India for using coal to produce a lot of their energy and producing a lot of greenhouse gases, because they're currently in a very poor financial situation in terms of their economy, and they're still rising up to becoming a first world country, you could say, right? Maybe I'm wrong to say that.
Well, I mean, first world it depends on how you're saying it. In international relations, first world, third world is kind of out. So we have high income, middle income, low income.
Right. So you would assume
moving from
India is a low income country.
Well, they're middle income, actually.
Right. Yeah. Well, they're still on their rise. So you can't blame them per se if a lot of their population doesn't even have electricity and they have to burn and things like this. You can't have India lead the charge because they can barely make everyday means and things like this. This is what she was saying. These were not, I mean, I'm paraphrasing her words.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of agreed with that. It has to be someone like America to lead the charge, because we have the resources to do so. So that was the gist of what she was saying. Of course, I watched it a while ago, so I can't remember exactly.
It's called Before the Flood.
Yes, that is the movie. You guys should go check it out. It was actually really... he had a lot of shots of glaciers that were really interesting. Of course, you get those classic shots where they have the glacial ice crashing into the water, and that's supposed to be whatever. And so I think a similar thing could be said about China, although of course they have a very strong economy now, and so you have to hold them accountable, and that's what the Paris Agreement was really for, to hold ourselves accountable. Of course, there's no legal or military restraints on it, or things that will consequences rather, to even being in the Paris Agreement. I think it was just a sort of a like an honor code sort of situation, if I'm not mistaken. We agree to do this, so let's do it, basically.
Well, nobody,
no one's...
no nation in the world no state in the world has the ability to force the United States to act in a certain way.
Exactly. So that's why I think it didn't make much sense to just pull out of it. It's just more of a power move, I guess, that Donald Trump wanted to enact. But I that doesn't mean we can't reduce our our greenhouse gas productions in the same way that we were going to. I think, anyways, it just looks bad on our part. I think looks really bad. But yeah, so I agree what you're saying. The Chinese can say, oh, we're actually producing a lot of solar energy and renewable energy, but we're actually burning a lot of coal. So it's sort of contradictory to what they're saying. But I have seen statistics that they're reducing. So this is, again, the problem. There's a lot of mixed messaging. So I've seen statistics that China has actually reduced their coal combustion over the years. So I don't know.
But also so speaking of some knowledge of the Chinese economy, there's some level the statistics that show that China is reducing its emissions is also partly based on the fact that they have no more to build. So the Chinese economy, in terms of the industrial construction that they're doing, they had overproduction, and so now they have unsustainable overproduction, but nowhere to produce it, and nothing to produce it for. So those measurements of reduction of CO2 emissions are the natural cycle of the market forcing production to go down, because some of the things like road construction, building construction, I mean, the Chinese government, these Chinese businesses, which are government partnerships or government owned, they have overproduced, and so I mean they have buildings, entire ghost cities where nobody lives, and you can't overproduce in this way and do it in a sustainable way. So that reduction is also part of the natural cycle of things going down. So not necessarily that the Chinese are moving away from CO2 production, but that it's the natural cycle of just lower demand of their industry.
So a lot of statistics can indeed be skewed to say what the people who are publishing the results, and this is a problem in science in general. The people who are publishing the results want their statistics to look the way that they want them to look, and you can skew any statistic that way. So this is more of a scientific problem in general, is why there's currently a lot of distrust in scientists. So in at least America, I'd say, I mean, if you take a look at the vaccine epidemic, right? People aren't vaccinating their children anymore, or some parents, because a lot of parents are thrown a lot of different statistics, and they don't know what to believe. So I certainly don't blame them if they don't. They want to take care of their children as best as possible. So who do they believe, right? I don't necessarily blame them. Of course, I believe vaccines do not cause autism in any way. I know that for a fact. But if you think it's not true, I don't necessarily blame you. It's your child, right? So. But
I mean, going off of this fact, so this idea. Is that now when we have a lot of news or media production, there's the feeling that we have to show a fair and balanced side to the reporting, right? Yes. So for every person that you put on, every Bill Nye appearance, you have to have a certain person who is skeptical for climate change, right? And there's the prevailing idea that even within science, this is a huge debate. But this is only done on news outlets where there is one-to-one. Because if we take this larger scope of the scientific community, it's like 100 to 0.1. There's almost unanimous consensus on things like man-made or human-induced global warming and different things like this. But on news shows, in order to have higher ratings or to show this fair and balanced approach, there's this idea that you should show one-to-one, where this is not the case. And in a lot of cases, there should be one-to-one. So like in terms of a lot of economic issues, different things like that, you can have people who half the population of economists think one way, half the population of economists think the other way, or there's some semblance of majority. But science is very, very science in general is a place where the minority of voices really don't need to have as much weight as they do in many circumstances. Now, there's also the theory that science and science advances only because their minority comes into power eventually, and then they're able to make their minority theories into the majority theories, and this is how we have scientific advancement. But now we have the majority of people saying the same thing over and over, and it's only the small percentage which are oil funded or old school and don't understand the changing dynamics or aren't climate scientists at all that are saying these kinds of things.
Yeah, that is generally the message that's being sent across America. So we really need to, I don't know, it's tough to convince a lot of people of what you want. I mean, obviously they're trying on the other side to convince us that that climate change is not a thing. And really it comes down to getting the message straight. So I mean, obviously if you listen to any scientists speak, they're going to agree that, like you said, 99 to 1, right? 100 to 1. Climate change is happening. It's going to happen soon. It is happening, and we're going to see the effects within our lifetime, if you're a millennial at least. And really, it's imminent. And I think generally what we need to get across is how we can make a change. And I think the way to do that is a lot of course, I mentioned Rayton Solar. They're just one of many companies that are trying to do this as efficiently as possible. So if we end up making renewable energy cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, eventually more companies are going to just switch over completely, because it's just more financially sound for them. So And of course, a company's sole purpose is to make money, right? So that's just fine. If it's financially sound for them, if scientists can make it this way, then that's going to benefit everyone. It'll reduce prices on almost everything. So I think recycling, which is also part of why we have plastic production is huge greenhouse gas emissions. So like recycling, we sort of eased it into societal norms and we don't even think twice about recycling now. So like that, if we can ease in renewable energy in a way like that, or perhaps don't use plastic bags, for instance, if we can ease that in, if we can make things more accessible and easier and cheaper, most importantly, I think money drives almost everything in America, at least, then I think we can see some change in the next 50 years. But it's not going to be easy, of course.
And my recommendations are continue doing things like the climate march, doing a physical act of protest out where you can be seen and be heard, eliminating that's a bad term to use now, but voting out of office, voting out of office people who are climate idiots, people who have no knowledge of science whatsoever, who won't listen to scientists and consider themselves the most righteous people on earth. Voting those people out. A lot of that is education, making sure that public education stays strong, that right-wing strict Christian ideology isn't put into a lot of education, because one of the reasons that climate change doesn't progress within very strict religious dogma of Christian nations is because of the interpretation of the Bible as the Word of God. Everything in there is true, and there was the covenant made between Noah and God that God would never destroy the earth again. So there is actually a very within this small percentage of very strict religious Christian ideology, there is the idea that God would never allow for Earth to destroy humans, because there was the covenant made between Noah and God after the Great Flood. So God said that I shall never destroy humanity again.
There you go. I think
that is an influence as well. So and then getting money out of politics, reversing Citizens United as much as possible and pushing that through. Unfortunately, Trump and the Republicans stole the Supreme Court seat, so that will be exceedingly difficult to have, and we'll continue to have idiots being elected into office that are bad for their constituents who are electing them, and we'll continue to do that unless we make serious steps to reverse this anti-science policy, make sure that education is dumbed down, is made to make voters idiots rather than informed people who are making correct decisions for themselves, their future, and their children's future.
Yeah, if we educate the electorate, the people who elect our officials, then we will see a large change in our policy in America. So get out and vote whenever you can, whenever an election rolls around, and take advantage of your right to vote. It's very important. I think we've covered the topic pretty well. Of course, we can return to this topic if you guys would like. Tell us in the comments section below. What are your views on climate change and all the science involved? If you'd like to read more about solar perovskites, I can leave a link in the description as
please.
well. I'll leave a link to an article. Hopefully it's open source. I usually get access to things that I through my university, so I'll try to get one that's open source. But yeah, Ivan, thanks so much for talking about climate change with me. Of course, we agree about climate change, so I know you're trying to play devil's advocate on me. All right?
I really love Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino, so I always try to be devil's advocate.
You guys should see Keanu. Oh my, isn't Charlize Theron in that movie also? Yes, she is. She goes up. Spoiler alert for Devil. I won't spoil it. It's actually an amazing movie, dude. That movie's awesome. I love that movie.
I love distracting you at the very end of the podcast.
What was I gonna say? All right, we always end our podcast in a song, in a segment called Hungover Radio. Where you, yes, the viewer or the listener, can send in your own music to gaminghungover@gmail.com. Leave a MP3 link would be best for me, but whatever suits your fancy. I'll try to get the song on the podcast. We only do it in the audio portion of the podcast so we don't get copyright strikes, etc. We didn't get a submission yet again, Ivan. It's like we're not popular or something. Get this podcast out to the people. The people need to hear our opinions on everything, because we're very self-centered about that. Now, anyways, my selection for Hungover Radio today comes from a little game called Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. The song is known as Snake Eater. Yes, it's the title of the game. Actually, this is not my favorite Metal Gear game, but it did have this is a really cool song. The game takes place, I think, in the 70s or the 80s, so this song was sort of a play on that era of James Bond music that was coming out, and as it is a spy tactical espionage action game.
How soon after the Cuban Missile Crisis is Snake Eater?
This might be during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
So that's 62.
Okay, so it was in the 60s. I can't remember when the game takes place.
I just remember that the Cuban Missile Crisis is in one of the montages of that game, but I can't remember how far apart it's. And all Metal Gear is in this alternate universe, which is similar but different, and it's all... Yeah.
It's amazing. It's so convoluted. Goddamn Kojima, you're amazing. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoy the song. Tell us what you think about climate science either on Twitter. Keep the conversation going at Gaming Hungover and in the comments section below. We'll catch you guys next week. I'm Julian.
And I'm Ivan. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Bye.